So thank you for joining today. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. So thank you for giving me some of your time in this presentation. And I just wanted to share a little bit of some of the things that I do. I'm currently a assistant professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I'm also a member of the Instituto Gráfico de Chicago, and I'm also a member of the Color Network. And I'll speak a little bit about those two things in just a minute. So the way I see the type of work that I do is a combination of three things. The first one is the artist. So as an artist, I have the responsibility to use my craft to address issues that affect my community, create awareness, and propose actions through my work, through my artwork. So I just selected a few projects to give you a better idea of the type of work that I do. One installation that I did is titled "I'm Not Who You Think I Am," and for this one, I see it almost as a timeless timeline where you can just see different portraits that kind of like represent different aspects of my art making, but also my experience as an immigrant coming to the United States and try to make sense of where do I fit in. In this work, I also kind of like play around with titles and translations and mistranslations as a way of using language as power. And a lot of this had to do with experiences that I had of, like for instance, this one was when I was living in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And then all of a sudden, like people would look at me and they would just look at me differently because I wasn't maybe blonde and blue eyes or something like that. And they would just stare at me like they have never seen a Latinx person or a Mexican. And there's a phrase in Spanish that says, "Que me ves? Tengo changos en la cara, okay?" Like kind of like, what are you looking at? Do I have monkeys on my face or what? And so a lot of these self portraits, they're made from the same mold, but then they are manipulated and re-sculpted to kind of like address different historical periods throughout Mexico and the United States, but also kind of like just playing around with titles again and kind of like just try to explain how complicated identity is, right? Like, and identity is a constant flux. It's always changing. So this is another example of one of the portraits where it's based on my resident legal alien card, like the way it was worded on the car, like permanent resident alien, but just the word alien on that card, on that ID card, was really important for me to capture and kind of like make fun of it, and also how crazy it is that I'm still considered to be quote unquote legal to be in this country, but yet I'm still labeled as alien, right? So these are some other works. This is more about the idea of the double consciousness by the readings of W.E.B. Du Bois, and the idea of the double consciousness. And this is kind of like addressing like different historical riots, and also the idea of assimilating to a different culture, right? And kind of like having like this whitewashing, trying to cover me or my face, and also addressing some historical figures like Zapata, or the idea of colorism that happens a lot in Mexico or in the United States, and how the lighter you are, the easier it will be for you to navigate this world, right? So the idea of being light skinned, and how that gives you favoritism in so many societies. So this is the title is I see muy europeo or muy blanco, no? And that's something that happens in Mexico and also in the United States and many other countries, this idea of colorism. And also thinking about phrases like picante pero sabroso, and just kind of like having fun with this project, learning a lot about ceramics, different processes, different techniques, but also how can I explain or try to explain how complex identity is. And then this is orgullo, maldición y bendición. So this is the idea of the cactus on the forehead, or nopal en la frente, which is a symbolism that you just can't deny who you are. Like you're still gonna look um like in my case, like a Mexican, and people are still gonna look at you that way. So how do you embrace that, no? And that kind of concludes with this piece, like I am who I am, and just kind of like embracing your skin, yourself, your identity, your culture, and just embracing everything. And then that kind of led to this other sculptures that have more of a hybridity into them, and I combine like the cactus sleeves or petals with cell portraits. And the idea is to think about the resiliency of this plant and how it can almost survive in any weather, any terrain, and it's just a very resilient plant, right? And I was thinking about that and thinking about my peoples and like Black, Indigenous, and people of color that have always been resilient. By coming to the States and kind of like finding opportunities and working their way up and so on and so forth. And this work happened right after the elections, so it was kind of like a way of not so much overtly try to say that I wasn't agreeing with the president that was selected, especially after he was mentioning a few remarks about my people as Mexican people. But it was a way of saying more like resiliency, excuse me, and think about the future and what kind of future or reality would I like to live in. So this work became it started to be towards that direction. How can I make my own world in this setting? And then from there, I just kind of like kept exploring with this idea of the hybrid portraits. And this is a body of work that I'm gonna continue to work on. This is the second piece that I did after that. And the title for this is Nopales Híbridos, an imaginary world of Rascuache futurism. And Rascuache is a really interesting word. What it means, it's making do with what's available, and the idea of being resourceful. And I think earlier in the conversation, some of you were talking about the limitations that we have now that we were going through this pandemic, that we might not have all the art supplies that we're used to make art. And right now is a great time for us to be resilient and just kind of like make do with what's available. And if we have that drive to make art, try to find different materials that we can easily find at home to make art. And we can chat a little bit more about that. So then from here, I started moving around. I was living in Boston at this time, and then I moved back to Chicago. So for a while, I didn't have like a studio space. So I'm still, now that I have a studio space and that I'm all set up, I want this body of work to grow and make a few more pieces out of clay. And then this is another project, which is just using different federal eagles that are easily found on eBay, like a mold, a ceramic mold, and then making different versions of them and changing the faces of them to kind of like create a different narrative that has a more of a contemporary context or concept too. So part of that project is just gonna keep going for for a few more years. And then last summer, I had the opportunity to be at the Kohler factory doing a residency, and this is kind of like the work that came from that exhibition. So once again, like I had no idea on how to do these processes of foundry. So the technicians there, they were really helpful, and they kind of like guided us through the process. And I learned how to make the patterns for, and then the molds, and then they guided us how to pour or they would pour the cast iron or brass for us. So you started to see some symbolism with the usage of the eagles and the cactus and the snakes, and we can talk a little bit more about that in our informal discussion. But part of this idea of the eagles and kind of like replacing the heads with, in this case, like more like a Latinx person, was with the idea of creating heroes that look like me and that can better represent me. Since when I would look into science fiction, like I wouldn't, a lot of the times, like people of color are completely erased or are the villains of the narrative. So here I was playing a little bit more around with the materials that were there, like some of the leftover sinks that I was able to reappropriate and have them cut off parts of it, and I can use them as a background for some of my pieces. The original piece for this, it was just like a replica skull, a plastic skull that I glue a bunch of corn grains into them one by one, and then making a mold from it and finally casting it in brass. And this is kind of probably the sculpture that I'm the most proud of, that I was able to do that summer. And I was able to put this modular piece together there. And it was just really exciting to kind of like see it all come together. And this is super heavy too, by the way. So another aspect of my art practice is the idea of the citizen, right? So as a citizen, I believe that social change starts within oneself, and that it takes community and relationships to manifest the change that we want to see. Together, we can create more equitable and just society. So with that, the way I see this is like I have an art skill that is art making, and it's also teaching. And how can I spread this to my community and bring art to locations or places that don't have access to art? And that's kind of like what we try to do with Instituto Gráfico de Chicago, which is a printmaking collective where we create print portfolio exchanges. And what that means is we invite different artists to participate. Each of us make a print, and we print an edition of those prints, and then we share it with one another. So that's a good way for us to collect artwork, but also to have other people enjoy our artwork. And also, you thinking about pre-making as a medium that can easily deliver different messages, and it's more affordable since you can make multiples. You can't really charge a lot of money for a print, but image-wise and message-wise, you can still, express that. So once again, this is, a desperate cry. This is shortly after the elections again. And then La Danza de la Serpiente, the dance of the serpent, is this is a print that kind of like talks a little bit about the different ways that we migrate, right? Like by foot, by train, by water, by the desert, by the air, and then the idea of all this man-made borders or fences that we create, and how can we try to break those things, right? So it's a little bit more about what happens in Gravadolandia, which is actually coming up in November. But we're gonna have it virtual. But typically, it's just a lot of people from different ages come together and they learn how to make a print. We ask the printmakers to show a technique where they can share with the audience how to print with using that technique, and they get to sell their work. And the other organization that I'm part of is the Color Network, and this is more focusing on ceramics, but it's also thinking about how can we create more visibility for people of color working with clay. And part of it is because we, both of some of my friends that we put this together, we realized that we were always approached by educators thinking like, hey, do you know some Latinx artists who are working with clay, or some African American artists who are working with clay? And there was an interest from educators to diversify their slides and the work that they share with their students, but there wasn't a platform. And also it was like it was for us to do extra work, or doing the work for others by looking for other artists that they can share. So instead, we decided to create this platform where it's a website, but also an Instagram page where we just feature different artists of color from all over the world. And it has been a great teaching tool for a lot of educators, but also just for us, and also for young artists who want to see themselves represented in this field, but also see what's happening in contemporary ceramics. And then the third category that I think about in my art practice is the educator. As an educator, I want to impact the lives of my students in a positive way and inspire new generations of artists to continue guiding forthcoming generations, creating an unbroken chain of shared knowledge. And that is very important for me, and that kind of like came from my first experience of teaching. This is from a mural that I created with my friend and mentor, Ricardo Santos Hernandez. And I was the co-teacher, and this was my first experience teaching in an after school program. And he was the one who really showed me like how to really have high expectations from the students, and how to motivate them for them to do the best that they can, and create this project-based learning where we have a deadline, we have to deliver a product, but at the same time, we're also teaching different aspects of art and design, and also how to be how do we prepare the students to be responsible, to be able to work in groups and work with others and share their ideas and find their voice as artists and as people. And then after that, I was able to lead this solar project by myself. And then, it's something that I never thought that I would do, like teaching, but just kind of like by learning from Ricardo and other mentors, like the importance of teaching and sharing knowledge, is something that just stuck with me, and I continued teaching and at different capacities. And then I got the opportunity to do the solar project where we had to work with ceramics and tiles. And this is before I was getting more into ceramics. So it was just a huge learning curve for me. And this is an example of a project where I took a project that it was probably a lot way bigger than what I could handle, but I took it and I grew with it. And we were able to successfully finish the project on time. And just the idea of how do you push yourself as a maker, as an artist, to make work, right? And how by just taking jobs or opportunities that might seem bigger than what you can handle, that's kind of like the only way that we can grow. And then this is some other murals that I have done with the help of the youth. This is the whole crew for this mural. And to me, this is important because I was one of these kids learning art making through after school programming. For me, it was black and white photography, how I got into this. And then from there, I just kept taking photography and then became a graphic designer. and then I went to get a master's in drawing, and that's when I started doing more sculptures with clay, and now that's what I teach. I teach ceramics, and this is just another projects that I've done with the youth and young artists, utilizing printmaking as well as painting to make a mural. I know we're probably running a little bit of over, but this is another project where it's just community based and driven. That it's based around this tortilla press, but it's also a printing press, and how that object can activate and change the spaces by creating pre-making programming, as well as making food, and then having a conversation and a dialogue as we're sharing food and the table, and also art making, and kind of like combining all these different components. And once again, the idea was to make this project mobile and adaptable to any setting, so we can bring art to places where they don't have art easily available. So once again, the artist, the citizen, the educator, these are like the three things that I look at when I choose to do any project, and I try to find like that one thing in between, or among the three, that can really simplify or keep me hopeful, or really challenges me to be a creative. So in my work, the fusion of these three categories is significant, because together they create the synergy that I need to stay hopeful, curious, playful, and take risk. And to me, all of that is really important. Like, art really connects us as people, right? And art can give us hope, for a better future, better reality. And through art, we can explore a lot of our own curiosities, and take risk by experimenting with different materials or different things. And it's also really important to have fun with what we're making, and be passionate about what we're doing. So with that, I say thank you, and I'll stop sharing the screen.
Thank you so much. I know I feel super inspired. We are running a little over, so I just want to check with our teams. Can everyone stay for 10 more minutes to have an informal conversation? Does that sound good? We'll end at 11:10. Perfect. So
I apologize. It's always so hard to condense it. This
no,
is
no.
like an hour-long presentation.
It was all really important information, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. So I'll hand it off. Do one of Christian, Lily, Alanis, do one of you want to start with your question to kick off the conversation? Or if you totally want to scrap your question and you have a new one, you can do that too. But I will turn my microphone off now.
No, yeah, most like two of my questions, they were answered like in the process of him like presenting and everything. Um, After seeing all this artwork, I really wanted to like really think, like I really thought about like what started, like what brought you into like art, I guess, like what brought you into like wanting to do all this, and like the just the process.
Hmm. That's a great question, and I think part of it was when I came to the States. That was in the year 2000. I came here, not really knowing the language, not really understanding the school system or society. Right, I was only the only notion that I have of the United States was what I would see on the movies, right? Which is, as we know, that's not reality. So it was a cultural shock when I first came to the States, uh, and then it was just overwhelming. And not knowing the language was a little bit of a struggle. So then I found this After School Matters program, or an after school program where they were teaching photography. So the first two classes, they were terrible because I wasn't understanding the instruction, or I wasn't understanding how the camera works and all the anatomy of the camera and all that stuff. So it was after the first week that I got really, better at it. And then I realized that I had this other tool, like a visual language, that I could use to my advantage and kind of like make sense of everything that was going on with me. I was not able to say it with words, but I was able to capture that with the visual language. And I think understanding the power of the visual really encouraged me to keep making art, and then thinking about other ways of combining photography with drawing. So for me, graphic design was a good path for me to pursue as a career, because I figured that I could have a stable money coming with that, because I also wanted to make sure that I paid tribute to my parents that did all this sacrifice to bring us over. And I knew that if I just told them, oh, I just want to be an artist, that was going to be a little bit hard for them to take. So I just wanted to make sure that I could be creative, but I could also show my parents that all the work that they did was worth it, and that I could sustain myself as an artist and was a creative. And then, of course, later on in life, I made a decision to go back to get a master's degree. And that was me also saying, I want to grow as an artist, but I also want to take this more serious. And I believe in myself as a maker, and I will make it work somehow. And as an artist, it's always, things are up and down. Sometimes you get a lot of opportunities, and sometimes you don't. So you just kind of have to keep pushing yourself, and in the work that you do reflects you, right? So my thing is always, whenever I engage into any project, is to always do my best and give it all that I can, and that usually brings more work, that usually brings more opportunities, and not take anything for granted, really. Mhm.
Thank you.
So the question that I had on my um paper, wasn't it, I think it was asking, because like I was looking at your artwork and it seemed like you had like a personal, like, spiritual connection to it. I was wondering, like, if you're like a spiritual person at all, or that way, or
Mhm.
like what would
Yeah,
you
that's a great question, and I was thinking about it, like how to talk about this, right? Like I grew up in Mexico, so I grew up with my parents in Mexico being Catholic. So our house was in front of a church. So that kind of gives you an idea. Like every day there was mass in the morning and at night, and we were living in front of it. So it's always in the background, like hearing the bells or the sermon and all of that stuff. And growing up, you know, the idea of being a Catholic, I think what I like is the philosophy behind it, which essentially is what's behind most religions. The idea of just try to do no harm. I think it comes down to that idea of how can we serve our community, how can we serve our family and in the world by doing our part. So I don't know if it's like, but then also by understanding history. Once I was in college and I was reading more about the history of Mexico and the United States, and the idea of colonialism, and also all the things that happened, right? Like the genocide and the erasure of people and the conversion of Catholicism from other belief system, that also informed me in another way, that it also made me not agree with what Catholicism has done throughout history. So then I just stopped going to church, and I just kind of like stepped back, and I was like, well, what is it? What is it that I can do to kind of like really do my part, but not necessarily support something that has oppressed others? So it became more of this idea, or thinking about spirituality as a way of questioning what does it mean to be human, right? And what does it mean to embrace all these different complexities, and more than anything, not do any harm, or try not to do harm. And I think that's kind of like the spiritual aspect. However, visually, I think based on what you saw, a lot of it has to do with with me growing up in Mexico, and visually being influenced by the church and all the installations that you see in the church, all the paintings, all the sculptures, and especially in Mexico, there's so many um, saints that we celebrate, and every almost every month there's a new celebration that entails like some sort of praying, but also installations or altars, or all kinds of these celebrations. A lot of it is like performative, a lot of it is visuals, a lot of it is community. So all of those things kind of like are obviously embedded into my psyche from growing up in Mexico and then coming in the States. The same thing, you start to see some similarities. So I think that's probably why, like in my work, it does have some references. It definitely has a lot of references to that, because I try to speak about the complexity of that, of colonialism, of migration, of religion and culture, right? And even how in Mexico, even if you're not Catholic as a believer, culturally, if you grow up in Mexico, you kind of have that connection, because everything is so much around religion.
So Alanis was wondering if your art is a way that you cope with your anxiety, and maybe an example of that, and then we will close the conversation.
Thank you, Alanis, for that quick question. And yes, I think a lot of it, it's I feel lucky that I have art as a coping mechanism and as a tool for me to deal with all these things that are happening to all of us as humans, right? Like it's a complicated thing to be a human, period. And we're always growing and adapting to our situations. So I think for me, an example of those anxieties is this idea of where do I fit in this culture, right? And I have to learn, do some research about the history of this country and my country, my homeland. Right now I'm a dual citizen too, so I have this duality, right? That happens. I think one of the anxieties is how, and part of it is the idea of the double consciousness, right? Like how, as an immigrant, I'm always kind of like questioning or thinking about not just being conscious of my space and what I do, but also how others sees me, right? Like especially the dominant culture. How do the Anglo society sees me in these settings? So a lot of it is that could be one of the anxieties, or some of the things that sometimes anything that we do, we kind of like think about how others are gonna react to it. And I feel like for me as an immigrant, it's like an additional layer. So that's kind of like an anxiety, like the idea of trying to find places where I feel comfortable and where I belong. And I think a lot of it, I have overcome a lot of those things, have just by the work that I've done and the goals that I have set out for myself. I think I have overcome some of those, but they still come back every now and then with simple things, like even like by, I don't know, like by ordering something, food, and how you start questioning things like, was that a racism act, or what is it? Like we call an order pizza the other day from an area around here, and we live in an area that is not let's say, the safest here. So the pizza place, they call us back, and I was like, oh, we actually don't deliver pizza there because. And then you're like, wait, was that like a form of racism, or what was it, And things like that happen on a regular basis, and then you start thinking like, was that because I don't know, they heard my accent? Was that because the place where I chose to leave, or what was it? So little things like that happen throughout, us just being part of this culture, and then sometimes you have to question it, and sometimes you just, maybe we're overthinking it. So I have to also sometimes just step back and be like, I think that was probably just me overthinking it. But sometimes it has been a straight up racism. Or also, I teach at a college level, and also thinking about academia and all these different worlds that we're part of. They're so complicated, and a lot of those are embedded in this structural racism that institution or those institutions have built throughout their history. So a lot of the times you have to not only do your best work, but also kind of like challenge those systems and try to change those systems so they're more equitable for everyone. So yeah, that's a great question. And especially now we even have an additional anxiety, right? Like us working from home and not being so certain what's going to happen, how that's affecting us as humans, as especially for the youth, for all of you. I'll be, if you have time, like, for you to share what's going through your mind, as a young creative during this time. If I know we're a little bit out of time, but I would love to hear from all of you. What's your experience like to be an artist in this time?
For us at Warner, our teacher usually makes us go outside most of the time and draw outside. She doesn't want us drawing inside because we're spending so much time inside. She wants us to go outside and explore the world or have a walk and take a picture of something and draw it. Or so I live near a cemetery and I know it will seem really weird, but I went there and I started doing graves. I started drawing gravestones because it's actually really interesting, the stories it has in them. Because some of them are military, some of them were other things. I don't remember much of them, but I like drawing them. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's such an important thing to remember, is that we can go outside and find different ways to connect with our community.
And I think that, those type of exercises, I think they also put us in a situation with otherwise we wouldn't have explored those places. So that is awesome that, you're just going to the cemetery, it's close by, and you're making work about it.
But other than that, I really thank everyone for taking a little extra time this morning. And I hope that you feel inspired, and good luck with the rest of the school year. And Salvador, thank you again. Have a good rest of your Monday, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.